Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. The house was supposed to be our fresh start, a place where my father could finally live in peace. But peace doesn't last long when people like Lorette Harrison are in charge. It started with a letter, then came the threats, and when they tried to take what was his, that's when I loaded the shotgun. Moving to a new place was supposed to be a fresh start for both me and my father. After years of bouncing between rental houses that were either too small, too expensive, or simply unfit for my father's condition, I thought we had finally found a home that could be ours. A modest, single-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Austin, Texas. Nothing fancy, but it had a decent front yard, a sturdy porch, and enough space for my father to move around without feeling trapped. My father, Silas Gray, was a man who had once been larger than life, both in spirit and presence. A former Marine, a veteran who had seen his fair share of combat, he had been the kind of man who took pride in being independent, the kind of man who never asked for help even when he needed it the most. But that changed after the explosion. A roadside bomb in Iraq had taken away his ability to walk, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. He never complained, never asked for pity, but I could see it in his eyes. The frustration, the quiet battles he fought every day just to maintain his dignity. I had promised him that wherever we ended up, he would have a life worth living. No compromises, no settling for anything less than what he deserved. So when I found this house, it seemed perfect. A quiet street, neighbors who minded their own business, and most importantly, a space I could modify for my father's needs. The first thing I did was build a sturdy wheelchair ramp leading up to the front door. It wasn't just about convenience, it was about freedom. My father hated feeling dependent on anyone, and with that ramp, he could at least come and go as he pleased. For the first few weeks, things were good. The neighborhood seemed peaceful. People smiled politely when we passed by, gave little waves from their driveways, but they never pried. It was exactly what I had hoped for, a place where my father could sit on the porch in the evenings, sipping his coffee, watching the world go by without feeling like he was being watched. At first, even I allowed myself to relax. Running my own small auto repair shop kept me busy, and coming home to a place that actually felt like home was a new kind of relief. The house had good bones, the yard needed some work, but for the first time in years, I felt like we were building something permanent. But peace never lasts forever. The first time I saw her, I knew trouble was coming. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I had just finished mowing the front lawn when a woman in a crisp beige suit stopped on the sidewalk, staring at our house like it personally offended her. She was tall and thin, her hair pulled into a severe bun, and everything about her screamed control freak. I wiped sweat off my forehead, already getting a bad feeling as she slowly approached, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown to some impending disaster. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp and authoritative, as if she was addressing an unruly student. "Are you the homeowner?" I folded my arms. "Yeah. Something wrong?" Her smile was tight and didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Lorette Harrison. I'm the president of our Homeowners Association. I like to personally introduce myself to new residents." I glanced at her, unimpressed. "That so? Well, I'm Randall Blaine. Nice to meet you." Her eyes flicked to the wheelchair ramp, and her expression immediately soured. "Interesting addition," she commented, her voice dripping with judgment. "I don't recall seeing a request for approval." I frowned. "Approval? For a ramp?" She nodded, her smile sharpening. "Yes, we have very strict aesthetic guidelines in this neighborhood. All exterior modifications must go through the HOA's approval process to ensure they align with our community standards." I held back a laugh. "You're telling me I need permission to make my own damn house accessible for my father?" She sighed, as if dealing with a difficult child. "I'm sure you understand that we have to think about property values. Structures like this can stand out in an unpleasant way. If we make exceptions for one home, then where do we draw the line?" There it was. She wasn't just talking about the ramp, she was talking about my father. I felt my jaw clench as I held her gaze. "Let me make something real clear for you, Ms. Harrison. That ramp isn't going anywhere. My father is a veteran, and he needs it to move freely. If you think some aesthetic guideline is more important than a man's basic right to accessibility, then you're out of your damn mind." Her nostrils flared, but she kept that same artificial smile. I see. Well, we do expect all residents to comply with the rules. You'll be receiving a formal notice soon. I suggest you reconsider." She turned sharply on her heel and walked away, leaving behind the unmistakable scent of cheap perfume and bullshit power plays. I watched her go, my blood boiling. So this was how it was going to be. This wasn't just about a ramp, it was about control. And I wasn't about to back down. The formal notice arrived 3 days later, slipped neatly into our mailbox like a snake waiting to strike. The envelope bore the official HOA seal, and as soon as I saw it, I felt my stomach twist. I didn't even need to open it to know exactly what it was about. Still, I tore it open and skimmed the contents. Dear Mr. Blaine, it has come to our attention that an unauthorized structure has been erected on your property. Per Section 4B of the Homeowners Association Architectural Standards, any external modifications must be submitted for approval. Your wheelchair ramp is not in compliance with the neighborhood's aesthetic guidelines and must be removed within 14 days to avoid fines and further action. We appreciate your cooperation in keeping our community's standards intact. Sincerely, Lorette Harrison, president of Oak Ridge Estates HOA. I exhaled sharply and clenched the letter in my fist. That condescending tone, the fake professionalism, the clear message buried between the lines. This wasn't about aesthetic guidelines. This was about getting rid of us. I walked inside and found my father in the living room, flipping through the sports section of the newspaper. He was already in his wheelchair, his coffee resting on the side table. I held up the letter. They're threatening fines if we don't take the ramp down. He lowered the paper, took one look at my face, and sighed. That didn't take long. I tossed the letter onto the coffee table. They really think they can tell me what to do with my own damn house. He folded his arms, a knowing look in his eyes. HOAs are like that. They love their power trips. They think they can just bully us into compliance? I scoffed. They don't know who they're dealing with. Don't let it get to you, he warned. People like that thrive on control. The more you fight them, the harder they push. I shook my head. I'm not backing down, Dad. This isn't just about a ramp. This is about you. You have every right to be comfortable in your own home. He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Then we fight. That same afternoon, I called the HOA office. No answer. I left a message. No response. The next day, I sent an email. Still nothing. Then the real harassment started. The first incident was small. A citation taped to my front door claiming that my grass was half an inch too tall. I laughed at the absurdity of it, but I knew exactly what was happening. The next day, I found a friendly reminder in my mailbox about keeping my garbage bins out of sight, even though they were exactly where they were supposed to be. And then, 2 nights later, I stepped outside to find that someone had knocked over the potted plants my father had placed on the porch. Coincidence? Not a damn chance. The worst part was, it was working. I could see it in my father's face, the way his jaw tightened every time he heard another letter slip through the mail slot, the way he hesitated before rolling down the ramp, as if he was starting to feel like a burden. That pissed me off more than anything. I was willing to fight, but watching them make my father feel unwelcome in his own home, that was the line they shouldn't have crossed, so I made a decision. It was time to push back. The harassment wasn't just annoying anymore, it was becoming a full-scale psychological attack. Over the next week, the HOA flooded us with notices, citations, and warnings, each one more ridiculous than the last. First, it was about the unauthorized ramp. Then they claimed my truck was too large for residential parking, even though I always parked it in my own driveway. After that, they cited me for excessive noise, which was laughable considering my father and I were about as quiet as 2 people could be. The worst part? It wasn't just the paperwork. Someone, I knew damn well who, started sending messages in more personal ways. One morning, I stepped outside to find my truck's tires slashed, 2 clean cuts deep enough to render them useless. Another day, I came home from work and saw that someone had moved our garbage cans into the middle of the driveway, blocking my path. It was a childish move, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. Then, one evening, my father and I were sitting in the living room when we heard a loud thud from outside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed it, a brick. It lay near the ramp, partially hidden in the grass. My stomach clenched as I stepped closer and saw what was scrawled in black marker across the surface. Leave. I stood there for a long time, gripping the bricks so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was about forcing us out. The next day, I decided I'd had enough. I stormed into the HOA office, fully prepared to tear Lorette a new one. The receptionist, a prim woman in a beige blouse who looked like she had been born to file complaints, didn't even glance up as she muttered, "Do you have an appointment?" I slapped the latest violation notice onto the counter. "No, but I have a hell of a lot of questions." She sighed, adjusting her glasses. "I'm afraid President Harrison is very busy today. If you'd like to submit an official appeal—" "I'm not here to submit a damn appeal," I snapped. "I'm here to tell her that if she keeps harassing my father, I'm taking this straight to a lawyer." That got her attention. Her lips thinned as she picked up the phone, muttering something before nodding toward the hallway. "She'll see you now." I stepped into Lorette's office, and there she was, sitting behind a perfectly polished mahogany desk, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked amused. "Mr. Blaine," she said smoothly, motioning to the chair in front of her, "what can I do for you today?" I didn't sit. "You can drop this bullshit crusade against my family." Her smile didn't waver. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." I tossed the brick onto her desk. It landed with a thud, right on top of a neatly stacked pile of HOA documents. Her eyes flickered to it, then back to me. "I assume you found that on your property?" I leaned forward, planting both hands on her desk. "I know this is you, and if it happens again, I swear to God." She tilted her head. "You swear to God what exactly?" I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my temper in check. "You're trying to make us leave, but we're not going anywhere. So consider this your warning. Stay the hell away from my father." She stared at me for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair, completely unfazed. "You seem upset," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "But I assure you, everything we've done has been entirely within our legal rights." I clenched my fists. This woman didn't care. She wasn't going to stop. She was enjoying this. "Well, here's something you should know," I said, stepping toward the door. "I don't play by your rules, Lorette. You want to keep pushing me? Let's see how far this goes." As I walked out, I heard her chuckle softly. And that's when I knew. This was war. I should have expected that Lorette wouldn't back down. People like her never do. The first real attack came a few days later. I was at work when my phone buzzed. A call from my father. There was something in his voice that made my stomach drop. "Randall, you need to get home. Now." I didn't ask questions. I threw my tools down, jumped into my truck, and sped through the streets. By the time I pulled up to our house, I saw them. 2 men in orange safety vests, power tools in hand. And standing off to the side, smug as ever, was Lorette Harrison. They were halfway through dismantling the ramp. I barely had time to put the truck in park before I was out the door, striding toward them, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Hey!" My voice boomed across the yard, making all 3 of them freeze. "Get the hell away from my house!" One of the workers, a lanky guy with a clipboard, looked at me, then at Lorette. "We have authorization from the HOA, sir," he said, like that meant anything to me. I stepped right in front of him, towering over him. "You have authorization from some power-tripping busybody. You do not have authorization from the homeowner. Now get off my damn property." Lorette let out an exaggerated sigh. "Randall, there's no need for hostility. This ramp is a clear violation, and we're simply enforcing the rules." I turned toward her, barely containing my rage. "You're trespassing." She tilted her head. "Technically, we're just performing community maintenance." That was it. I stepped onto the porch, grabbed the Remington 870 from inside the doorframe, and walked back out, holding it casually at my side. Lorette's smirk faltered. The workers? They damn near bolted. I took one slow step forward, my voice calm but firm. "You're leaving. Now." The lanky guy didn't need convincing. He dropped his clipboard and scrambled toward his truck. His partner followed. But Lorette? She just stood there, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This isn't over," she hissed. I let the weight of the shotgun rest comfortably in my hands. "Yeah? Well, next time, bring an army." She stormed off, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. I watched them drive away, my grip still tight on the shotgun. They had crossed a line, and if they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. I thought that after the last incident, Lorette would back off. I was wrong. She was like a vulture, circling, waiting, looking for any excuse to make our lives hell. The letters kept coming. The fines started piling up. My mailbox was stuffed daily with violation notices for things like unsightly decorations, we had none, and failure to maintain landscaping. The lawn was trimmed better than a golf course. But it wasn't just the paperwork. It was her presence. I'd catch her standing across the street, arms folded, watching our house like a prison guard waiting for an escape attempt. She wanted me to know she was there. She wanted me to feel watched. Then, one evening, she went too far. I had just gotten home, parking my truck in the driveway, when I saw something that made my blood run ice cold. Lorette was on my porch, and she wasn't alone. 2 other HOA members stood behind her, but that wasn't what had my fists clenching. She was standing over my father, my paralyzed father, who was just sitting there in his wheelchair, minding his own damn business, enjoying the fresh air. And she was leaning in close, her voice low, but sharp as a knife. I didn't hear the start of the conversation, but when I slammed the truck door shut, her next words cut through the air. "People don't want to see this every day. You should be more considerate." Silas looked up at her, his expression unreadable. But I knew my father well enough to see what was happening behind his calm exterior. He was humiliated. That's when I lost it. I was across the yard in seconds, striding onto the porch, my pulse pounding. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I growled, stepping between her and my father. Lorette straightened up, her face settling into that same condescending smirk she always wore. "Randall," she said smoothly, "I was just having a friendly discussion with your father. He seems to be under the impression that he has the right to turn this neighborhood into some kind of retirement home." I felt my muscles tense. "Say that again." She didn't. Instead, she glanced down at my father, tilting her head. "No offense, Silas, but you should consider spending more time inside. It would be easier for everyone." Silas exhaled sharply. His hands clenched the wheels of his chair, his knuckles turning white. That's when I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Shame. Lorette had done what years of pain, injury, and surgeries hadn't been able to do. She had made my father feel small. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until we were nearly nose to nose. "Get off my porch." Lorette chuckled, like this was all a game to her. "Randall, you don't own the sidewalk." I didn't let her finish. I turned, reached inside the doorway, and grabbed the Remington 870 from the rack by the entrance. The sound of the pump action sliding forward was like thunder in the silent evening. Lorette and her cronies froze. One of the HOA men, a pudgy guy in a polo shirt, took a step back so fast he nearly fell off the porch. The other guy, a younger man who looked like he regretted every decision that led him here, was already halfway to the sidewalk. But Lorette? She stood her ground, her lips pursing, her eyes narrowing. "This is a threat," she said, her voice tight. "No?" I said, leveling my gaze at her. "This is me telling you that you've crossed a line. My father has lived through more than you could ever imagine. He fought for this country, and you have the audacity to tell him he doesn't belong here, that he should stay inside, so people don't have to look at him?" I took a step closer. "You're trespassing. I want you off my property, now." The 2 men were already gone, power walking down the street like their lives depended on it. Lorette hesitated. For the first time since I met her, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Doubt. She took a slow step back, her expression hardening. "This isn't over." I smirked. "Oh, I know." She turned on her heel and marched away, her heels clicking against the pavement. I watched her go, my grip still tight on the shotgun. Silas exhaled beside me, rubbing his temples. "Jesus, Randall, you really had to go for the shotgun." I glanced at him. "She humiliated you." He nodded. "Yeah, and you scared the hell out of her." I cracked a grin. "Good." I leaned against the porch railing, still watching as Lorette disappeared into the night. This wasn't over, but if she wanted a war, she'd just gotten one. I knew Lorette wasn't going to take what happened on the porch lightly. She wasn't the type to let something like that slide. She had power, and she wasn't about to let me make her look weak. 3 days passed. No letters, no warnings, no HOA enforcers sniffing around. It was too quiet. That's why, when my father called me at work in the middle of the afternoon, I felt that gut-wrenching certainty that something was wrong. I picked up. "Dad," his voice was calm but tight. "They're here." I didn't need to ask who. I dropped everything, jumped into my truck, and sped toward the house. I barely registered red lights, stop signs. Nothing mattered except getting home. When I turned onto our street, my hands tightened around the wheel. 3 HOA enforcers, 2 hired security guards, a flatbed truck with tools and workers. They were going to take the ramp down. Lorette stood in the middle of the chaos, clipboard in hand, giving orders like a battlefield general. She wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to make an example out of us. I slammed the truck into park, yanked the door open, and stormed up the driveway. One of the security guards, a guy built like a refrigerator, stepped forward, blocking my path. "Sir, I need you to stay back." I shouldered past him without stopping. "You need to get the hell off my property." Lorette turned at the sound of my voice. "Randall," she said smoothly. "I assume you received the final notice." I clenched my jaw. "What notice?" She smiled in that smug, condescending way that made my blood boil. "The one informing you that since you refused to comply, the HOA has exercised its right to remove unauthorized modifications at the homeowner's expense." I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. "You think I'm going to let you tear down my father's ramp?" She motioned toward the workers. "They've already started." I looked past her, and sure enough, one of the workers was already prying up the wooden boards. That's when something inside me snapped. I turned, walked up the porch steps, and grabbed the Remington 870 from just inside the door. When I came back out, I racked the slide, the loud ka-chunk echoing down the street. Everything stopped. The workers froze, their tools hovering midair. The security guards stiffened. And Lorette? For the first time since I met her, her confident mask cracked. I stepped forward, resting the shotgun casually against my shoulder. My voice was calm. "Last chance. Get the hell off my land." One of the workers dropped his crowbar and took off running. The others hesitated for half a second before scrambling after him. Even the security guards backed away, one muttering something into his radio. Lorette stood her ground, but I could see the way her hands trembled around her clipboard. "This won't end well for you," she hissed. I grinned. "For me? Lady, you're the one trespassing." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned sharply and stormed off, heels clicking furiously against the pavement. I watched them leave, my grip still tight on the shotgun. This was the last straw. She had come into my home, tried to destroy my father's freedom, and now she thought she could win through brute force. She had no idea who she was messing with. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I knew Lorette wouldn't take this loss quietly. She'd been embarrassed. She'd been scared. And now she was going to pull every legal string she could to make my life hell. It started the next morning. A certified letter was waiting in my mailbox, stamped with official HOA insignia. Inside was the final escalation. "You are hereby notified that due to continued non-compliance with HOA regulations, legal action is being pursued against your property. Failure to remove the unauthorized structure will result in escalating fines, a lien against your home, and potential legal eviction proceedings." I read it twice. Then I tore it in half. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. Lorette wanted to break us, to force us out not just through harassment, but by using the law itself. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. That afternoon, I walked into the county courthouse with a folder full of paperwork. Lorette wanted to play legal games? Fine. I filed an injunction against the HOA, citing violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Under federal law, they couldn't legally force the removal of an accessibility structure that was medically necessary. An hour later, my lawyer sent Lorette a cease and desist letter. She wasn't expecting that. By the time I got home, my phone rang. Unknown number. I picked up. "Randall." Lorette's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the cracks. "I think we should have a civil discussion about this." I smiled. "You had your chance." And then I hung up. A week later, the ruling came down. The court sided with us. The HOA's claims were dismissed. The fines were wiped away. The ramp was legally protected, and any further harassment would be considered discrimination under federal law. Lorette had lost, and just like that, the reign of terror was over. But I wasn't done with her yet. That evening, as I sat on the porch with my father, watching the sunset, I saw Lorette walking past. I called out, "Hey, Lorette." She stopped, turned. I smirked. "You should consider spending more time inside. It would be easier for everyone." She clenched her jaw and kept walking. I leaned back, satisfied. We had won. Victory tasted sweet, but I wasn't naive. Lorette wasn't the type to go down quietly. She had spent years ruling this neighborhood with an iron grip, bending people to her will. Losing wasn't in her nature. At first, she tried to pretend nothing had happened. She still walked around like she owned the place, nodding stiffly at people, acting as if her little war against my father had never taken place. But the problem with tyrants? Once people see them bleed, they stop being afraid. The whispers started first. I'd overhear neighbors murmuring in the grocery store, at the gas station, even in their own driveways. Did you hear? She tried to kick out a veteran, threatened to evict him over a wheelchair ramp. And she lost. Badly. Lorette had built her power on fear, on making people believe she could ruin them if they didn't comply. But now, people were laughing at her. Then came the HOA meeting. I didn't bother attending, but my father and I sat on the porch that night, sipping coffee as we watched the fallout. Neighbors flooded out of the clubhouse, their faces a mix of shock and barely contained amusement. A few of them spotted me, raising their hands in silent salutes of respect. It didn't take long before one of them, old Mr. Dawson from down the street, walked up our driveway. "It's done," he said, grinning. "They voted her out." I chuckled. "About time." Dawson laughed, shaking his head. "You should have seen her face. She tried to fight it, but no one was on her side. The board stripped her of her position, effective immediately. She's just another homeowner now." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It was over. The next day, a moving truck pulled up to Lorette's house. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe she was getting rid of old furniture, doing some renovations. But then I saw her, standing on the curb, arms crossed, watching as men loaded boxes into the truck. She was leaving. Silas, sitting beside me, smirked. Didn't take her long to run. I nodded. Bullies don't like to stick around once they lose their power. As the truck rumbled away, Lorette caught sight of us. For a moment, she just stood there, stiff as a statue. Then, finally, she turned and disappeared into her house, a house that no longer belonged to the queen of the HOA. With Lorette gone, the neighborhood changed. The new HOA president, a reasonable guy, someone who cared more about actual community well-being than forcing people into cookie-cutter houses. People who had once been too scared to push back against the rules started challenging them. Someone finally put up that garden gnome display Lorette had banned. Another family repainted their house a bright blue just to spite her old rules. And my father? He sat on that porch every damn day, drinking his coffee, watching the sunset, exactly where he belonged. The ramp stayed, and so did we.